You're listening to the Radius Church podcast, recorded live each Sunday in North Hollywood, California.
I am so excited to spend the next few minutes together because we are in for something a little bit different than we're used to, especially if you've been jumping onto the Radius online feed for the last several weeks. Today, we get to hear from my dear friend, Jason Jaggard. Jason Jaggard is an exceptional mind, and he is an executive coach, but he is also someone who has volunteered and served within the Radius community from the very beginning. Every time I talk to Jason, what I think expands. How I see the world expands. It's going to be different today because every time you interact with Jason Jaggard, something different happens. So let's have some fun. We're glad that you're with us. Welcome, my friend Jason.
Hey, glad you are with us. This is the second installment of our series called State of Disunion. I am your host, Jason Jaggard. I'm filling in for Joseph Barkley because he lost a height competition with me and I won. I'm filling in for Joseph Barkley because his beard has COVID. And he refuses to shave it. That's the thing, we're like, Joseph, just shave it. And he's like, no, 6 feet for me. I'm Jason Jaggard, I'm filling in for Joseph Barkley because 2 weeks ago, Katie Barkley did such a good job, everyone praised her more than him, and he's pouting at home and he refuses to come back onto the camera until we all collectively apologize. I am sorry, please come back. We miss you already. We don't know how this is gonna go. When Joseph said that we were going to do a series on politics, I know lots of people have probably lots of different opinions about that, and I may lose some of you from the very beginning, but I wanted to be honest and out myself. I love politics. I love politics. I love government. I love elected officials. I love all the things you're not supposed to love. And I want to be honest, I don't love them like people love Beyonce or the Lakers. I love them like Renee Zellweger loves Tom Cruise in the beginning of Jerry Maguire. What does she say? I love him.
I do. I love him. I love him. And I don't care what you think. I love him for the man he wants to be, and I love him for the man that he almost is. That's how I feel about elected officials, and I've been around quite a bit of them actually. My life is strangely exciting to me. I've been in the same room for Q&As with Joe Biden, with George W. Bush, with Barack Obama. I've had conversations with Chuck Todd from Meet the Press about third-party candidates. I have a friend, Asia Brown, who's the mayor of Compton. She's the youngest mayor in the history of Compton, and I'm crazy go nuts about her and her husband and their family. The people that I've been around who serve in public office are, there's always a few bad eggs, but they are on the whole very intelligent, very thoughtful, compassionate, and behind closed doors, they're actually very respectful of each other. Recently, I was on the phone with two senators after they passed the stimulus package, like minutes after they passed the stimulus package in Congress. And it was a Republican and a Democrat. And I was shocked at how nice they were to each other and how deferring they were and how much they respected each other and how much they were for each other. And they would tease each other. It was an off-the-record conversation. Usually when you're off the record, you're meaner. But elected officials, when you're off the record, they're nicer. And it's just a fascinating conversation. And I have a huge degree of respect for anyone who puts skin in the game. Anybody who would rather shape world events than comment on them. And knowing that whatever choice they make, 40% of the world is going to hate them. It's like parenting, except your kids have Fox and CNN as outlets for telling you how horrible you are. So I just love them. And if you're an elected official watching this, I'm for you, and I'm happy that you're doing what you're doing, and I know that it's a hard gig. So when Joseph said that we're going to talk about this, I got excited. I think it's an important conversation. I was talking to my nephew yesterday, and he said, "Why are you talking about politics in church?" And I said, "Well, politics is just another word for relationships." And I think it's important for us to figure out how to do relationships well. And I think that the wisdom that comes from the scriptures and the wisdom that comes from God might be relevant as we try to navigate political relationships. Today, we're going to be talking about voting. And I was a little nervous to say that out loud, but that's what we're doing. If you're anything like me, you're watching the number of views that are happening right now and watching it drop. And don't worry, I'm not going to tell you how to vote. Joseph's going to do that next week. I do want to talk about how we hold our vote. And voting is a fascinating idea. It's a fascinating conversation. And I want to acknowledge that when you talk about voting, people might get tense, the way that a cat might get nervous when a dog walks in the room. There's anxiety that can come from that because it's
personal. It's private. And if you don't believe that, do a little thought experiment with me. Imagine you're on a flight, like 20 years from now, and you get on a plane and everyone's wearing masks, so it looks like you're all going to the same Batman villain convention.
No one cared who I was till I put on the mask.
And imagine walking past everyone, sitting down, strapping yourself in for a 2-hour flight, and you turn and look to Bane number 438 next to you. Don't say who you are, don't ask them who they are, don't introduce yourself, but look at them and say with a straight face, so who did you vote for in the 2016 elections? And see how that goes. It won't go well, usually.
You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it.
Because voting is so personal and it's so private and passionate. People are very passionate about this. I know people on dating apps who will say things like, if you voted for person X, don't even talk to me. If you voted for person Y, like don't even, I won't give you any attention. And that is a fascinating thing. Like our vote is the thing that we use to decide who we're going to let into our lives. Our vote, who we voted for, who other people voted for, determines who we allow ourselves to respect. Hashtag Thanksgiving family reunions. It shapes who we even allow ourselves to love. And it is this powerful thing in our society. And oftentimes it feels like we're not holding our vote, but our vote is actually holding us. And I want to explore that a little bit with you today, is what is a healthy way of holding our vote, because it's complicated. Voting can be complicated. In 2016, I was watching the debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and I have a weird life. I got to watch it with a CNN commentator, and they actually helped coach George W. Bush on the debate. It was a bipartisan room, and it was a small group of people who were watching the debates, and during the commercials, he would explain what he was seeing and what he was observing and how they coach people for debates. It was fascinating. And one of the things I'll never forget that he said was voting is, and the dialogue around voting is way more complicated than we want to make it. There's a who did you vote for? He said, but who did you vote for is like one way of looking at it, but there's like 6 or 7 questions that surround voting. Like, who did you vote for? Who do you wish you could have voted for? Who do you think will win? Who do you think should win? Like, there are all these different questions, and you can ask a person those 4, 5, or 6 questions, and you can get 5 different answers for those 5 different questions, and then we try to squeeze it into a who did you vote for? So anytime you hear a person say you can tell a lot about a person from how they vote, I'm always a little skeptical of that. I mean, who you voted for tells you who you voted for. That's what it tells you. But there's a lot that goes into that, and a lot that goes deeper than that. And so what I want to do is I want to dive a little bit with you and those of you who are sitting with people on your couches that maybe voted for different people, and have a conversation around this. And really the question I want to ask is, where does God play into all this? Where do the scriptures play into all this? Where is wisdom in all this? And of course, where is love in all of this? I want to suggest that the scriptures talk a lot more about voting than we think. And again, you might be getting nervous. Don't worry, this is going to be relatively painless. The Latin word for vote is votum. And that word votum has 2 meanings that I want to explore that are profound and rich and deep and actually are flooded, saturated in the scriptures. The first idea that is captured in the Latin word votum is vow. That's where we get the word vow, votum, vow. I love that word. We don't use that word a lot in common vernacular unless we're talking about weddings and marriages until death do us part. So imagine if, you looked at your vote as a vow. I'd be like, easy, buddy. I just pulled a lever, I pushed a button. Calm down. While we don't use the word vow very often, there's another word that we do use more often, which is this idea of commitment. Now, as soon as I say the word commitment, if you are a single Angelino, usually a gentleman, you might get a shiver down your spine. And I don't want to be too hard on the guys. For every Peter Pan, there's an equal Tinkerbell who also is living her best life and doesn't want to grow up. We as Angelinos, whether they're men or women, we can agree that it's never Neverland, and there's this kind of temptation not to grow up because we can be afraid of commitment. Or even sometimes, I don't know about you, sometimes if you've heard this, I'm just really non-committal, just keeping my options open, just feeling things out, just dipping my toes in the water. What's interesting, one time I was hanging out with a buddy of mine who's a coach, and there was another buddy of ours who's not a coach. Our buddy who's not a coach says, yeah, I'm just really non-committal. And my buddy who is a coach looked at him and goes, that's interesting. So how long have you been committed to being non-committal? But it's a great question because your life is the sum total of the things that you're committed to, including being committed to not committing to anything. That is a commitment. What's really fascinating is that the scriptures talk a lot about commitment, but not necessarily in the way that we might think. In Joshua chapter 24, Joshua is this fascinating book. It's a piece of military history. And in Joshua chapter 24, Joshua, the leader of the people of Israel, is giving a speech to the nation. And this is what he says. I love this. He says, "Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness." Now, you might expect a person who's following God to invite people to make the same choice. So that's par for the course. "Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness." And then you might expect him to say this too: "Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the rivers and in Egypt, and serve the Lord." So that's fine. You expect that from a pastor. You expect that from a leader who likes God, right? But then in the next verse, it's fascinating. I love this. In the next verse, he says something that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be in the Bible. He says, "And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord." So if that doesn't ring your clock, ring your bell, if that doesn't ring something, if you're not ringing, if there's no ringing, he says, so Joshua says in verse 15, "And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord." So if that doesn't sound good to you, then he says, "Choose this day who you will serve. Whether the gods of your fathers that you served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you will dwell." He's like, just pick something. Like, just choose something. And the principle here, when we're talking about your vote, when we're talking about your votum, when we're talking about your vow, is this understanding that there is something divine that happens when you commit to something. When you commit, when you are all in, when you grab onto something, that's what makes marriage so powerful. It's not in who you commit to, it's in the committing that something lights up, that the power is created, that something sacred gets to happen. Oftentimes we're afraid to grab onto something because we're afraid of making the wrong choice. And here's what's really beautiful about that, is it seems as if in this passage God is saying, I'd rather you fully commit to the wrong choice than commit to no choice. Martin Luther said it this way: sin boldly. Like, if you're gonna make a mistake, go, like grab on, like live, like commit to something. And then you might be thinking, well, what if I make the wrong choice? And here's what's cool. Cool isn't painful, but it's cool that it's helpful, is God and reality have a wonderful way of showing us when we make a bad choice. Like when we make a bad choice, there is resource there. There's like, we run into the wall and that didn't feel good. And that's how we learn. Like, we learn through committing. It's harder for God to teach us something through not committing than it is for him to teach us something through the wrong commitment. And it seems as if Joshua is saying, hey, look, like, just I'm not drawing a line for you. I want you to draw a line. Draw your lines and then choose this day who you will serve. And I wonder who's watching this who lives a kind of like toe in the water life, a half in, half out life. Like, in what spaces are you dabbling? And you're missing out on the power of just committing to something. And if you get a little anxious around the word commitment, I just want to be honest, I'm right there with you. I work with a coach. I love my coach. He's incredible. And we were having a conversation recently about this idea of commitment, because there's layers to this. Even though I do this for a living, there's like so many layers. We call it in our work, it's a summitless peak. And we were talking about commitment, and he asked me, Jason, what emotions come up for you when you think of commitment? And I said, fear, anxiety, I feel trapped, I feel claustrophobic, it's gonna be a sacrifice, am I not gonna have the energy? What if I make the wrong choice? All these things. And he starts laughing. And I said, we have a good relationship. I was like, what are you laughing at? And he says, that is not how I relate to commitment at all. He says, for me, commitment is vibrancy, it is opportunity, it is life-giving, it is fun, it pulls out the best in me. He said, Jason, I commit recreationally. I don't even care what it is I'm committing to. Like, if I'm gonna lose weight, like I wanna go like 110%, and he does. He's got like pictures of him when he was he's 65 now. He's got pictures of him when he's in his 30s all shredded. He's like, they're posted all over the house. Like, I'm going 110%, I wanna look great in my 60s. Like, he just, everything he does, he just goes for it. And because he knows that there's power in the committing. And it seems as if that's what Joshua is saying. Joshua is saying, hey, look, there's power in committing, and I'd rather you fully commit to something than commit to nothing. So that's the first big idea of this idea about voting. And the second idea is actually my favorite. See, the second intonation of the word votum in Latin, the first one is vow, the second one is voice. This idea of using your voice. Now, I think when it comes to voting and your voice, I actually think that most people That makes sense for them. Fight the power, use your voice for change. We get that. In fact, this is one of my favorite moments in like political public discourse. President Obama is campaigning for Hillary, and he mentions Donald Trump. Some of you have seen this before. He mentions Donald Trump, and of course, he's talking to a room full of Democrats, and the audience starts booing, boo, boo, boo. And Obama goes, look, don't boo, vote.
Don't boo, vote.
I think that's a pretty good impersonation. And that's a call for no matter what party you're a part of. Like, if you don't like what's happening, don't boo, vote. And in Australia, it's actually against the law if you don't vote. Like, you actually get fined if you don't vote. In Australia, they have a saying that's ubiquitous all over the continent, which is, we have the form of government we deserve. And it really pulls out this spirit of civic service, of using your vote as your voice to affect change. But here's the deal. Whenever we look at voting primarily and exclusively as a form of activism, something paradoxical happens, because I don't know about you, but sometimes, have you ever wondered if your vote matters? Have you ever wondered, or maybe you know that your vote doesn't matter. Maybe you're a blue in a red district. Like, if you're a Republican in LA County, your vote does not matter. If you are a Democrat in Orange County, your vote does not matter. If you're a Libertarian in any county, your vote does not matter. When it comes to affecting change, when it comes to let's be real, you're not gonna, if you're, depending on what county you're in, it doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the change. And so ironically, if the primary reason why you vote is to affect change, it actually decreases people's desire to vote, because you don't believe that it will affect change. So I want to offer a different perspective on this, because your voice, you don't just use your voice to affect change. I grew up in a musical family. We have a music room in our home. My mom was a music teacher. My parents were both in choir and church. I grew up singing. I was in a couple bands. They were bad, way worse than Joseph's. I didn't wear eyeliner.
Everything I see, you'll never understand.
That never gets old. When I sang, I didn't sing to affect change. I love music. I find myself humming. I find myself singing when I'm alone. At any given moment, I'm like Will Ferrell and the other guys. You are welcome, internet. I don't know if that's gonna be funny or annoying, but we'll see how that goes. When I'm humming, when I'm singing, when I'm by myself, even when I was in a band, I wasn't doing it to fight anything. I wasn't doing it to protect the status quo. I wasn't doing it to be progressive. I was singing because there was a song in my heart. I was singing because it feels good to sing. What would it look like if we looked at our vote not predominantly as a mechanism of persuasion, but a mechanism of expression? And what would it look like for us to care more about the song that our lives are singing than the lever that we pull once every 4 years? That's what I want to invite you into. In fact, that's what Joshua invites us into. So in that second passage in Joshua chapter 24, he says this, and I love this. So in Joshua chapter 24, verse 15, after he says, hey, look, draw a line in the sand, pick whatever you want, just pick something. He sounds like my dad when we were at Blockbuster Video back in the 90s. Just pick something. For the love of God, pick something. So after Joshua draws a line in the sand and invites us to choose something, Joshua says, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And there's something beautiful about that. It's like he's saying, I found my thing. I found what I feel like is the thing. I found the thing that is worth wrapping my life around. I found the thing that is going to inform the contours of how I use my time and my money and my energy. I found something life-giving. I found something expansive, and it makes my heart sing. And I'm going to use my voice not only as a mechanism of persuasion, but also as a mechanism of expression. Just to say, this is who I am. This is what I care about. And what if every 4 years or every 2 years or whatever election we're in, we voted not to keep things the same, stay the course, or not to change because things are going so bad, but simply because there's an opinion in our hearts that matters. And just like a song or a hum, we got to get it out. And voting is the way that we do that. Now, if you're anything like me, you're thinking, well, look, if I sing my song and then so-and-so in this part of the country sings their song, and my neighbor who I don't agree with sings their song, and the person who looks different than me sings that song, and the person who has a different socioeconomic status or worldview sings their song, and they're all different songs, that is not music. And I hear you. I want democracy to be like classical music, right? I want everyone to know their notes. I want them to read the music, and I want them to all play in unison and for it to sound perfect. And most importantly, I want to be the conductor. I don't know if you ever feel that way, like if only I could be in charge. We judge presidential candidates for having the egotism to say, I think I should lead the world. But then we watch the news and we watch elected officials and we criticize them as if we should be in charge. Like, I think that I should hold the baton. The thing is the American democratic system, no democratic system, is classical music. It's messier than that. It's sloppier than that. It's improvisational. There's dissonance. There's tension. Different people are in charge at different moments. Sometimes I like where it's going, sometimes I don't, and then things click and things change and it evolves. Is it possible that democracy isn't meant to be classical music? Democracy is meant to be jazz. And I want to out myself. I love jazz. The first CD I ever bought, it was the same year that Bryan Adams' Everything I Do It For You came out. It was the same year that Color Me Bad came out with I Want to Sex You Up, which I hope children are not listening to this conversation. The first CD I ever bought was Benny Goodman live at Carnegie Hall. I was just a little guy. And then the next CD was John Coltrane, then Miles Davis, then Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, like Ella Fitzgerald. These artists, I loved their music, and I loved their music because it wasn't, I like classical music too, but I loved their music. It was unique because it was improvisational. It was because it was like the American democratic system. Like, what would it look like if we came to appreciate democracy as jazz? And is it possible that God loves jazz? He loves the tension, that he loves the dissonance, just so long as we play. In fact, there's a Latin saying that goes, vox populi, vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. It doesn't mean that we get to decide what God says, but what it does mean, or what it might mean, is that God gets to express himself most fully when we all sing loud together. And is it possible that if we can listen in the tension, in the dissonance, in the taking turns, in the sometimes not liking what's happening, but then having that jettison us up into things that we do like, that there's something happening and that God is at work, and for us to take our part and play our part, not simply to affect change, but simply because God is inviting us to create the music with him. So this is the question I want to ask you. What would it look like for you to revisit your commitments? What are you committed to? And what would it look like for you to revisit how you're using your voice? Have you found your song? Have you found the things in your life worth singing about? And have you found using your voice in a way not simply as persuasion, to where if it doesn't work, I'm not even going to play, but to say, no, I just love to play. And that is what God is inviting us into. He's inviting us into creating music together. And then as you find things worth committing to, and as you find things worth singing about, and as you find a life that is inspiring to you and that honors what it means to be alive, in that context, in that milieu, then vote. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for the music of us wrestling with what it means to live life together. Thank you for government. Thank you at every level, at the family level, at the suburb level, at the city level, at the state level, at the national level, at the global level, that we come together to figure out how we can create a better future together. Thank you for the tension. Thank you for the jazz. And we offer our lives to you. And may we wrestle well with you. May we wrestle with our commitments. May we wrestle with our voice as we seek to find a more beautiful future. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Thank you for listening. For more information, follow us on social media at Radius Church LA and visit us on the web at radius.la.